This is a group of amazing professionals and community leaders, a bookstore owner, professional storytellers, therapists, some wonderful people. And I want to thank you all just for showing up, for the trouble involved in that, and some came long distances. And also your interest in this, to me, is incredibly wonderful. It's heartwarming. So we're going to go straight to questions. Please.
Tim, make the case for a business leader who has to focus on the bottom line. Make the case for him or her to focus on work-family life balance.
I think this is a great question, Craig, as I said to you earlier. Obviously, if we are talking about social change, we can't afford to go into this with some idealistic view that doesn't pay any attention to the realities. We are a free market economy, and people have to put food on the table. They need jobs. Companies need to be able to make profits. My point is that let's get past short-term thinking and go to long-term thinking. Long-term thinking means if your employees have positive family life, they are going to be more productive, happier employees, and that eventually your bottom line is going to be affected by that. Not to mention that you owe it to your community as a company to help your community thrive and grow, which creates happier consumers for you. So that's the way I look at that.
You are clearly a storyteller.
Thank you.
How has that affected, or has that been an important part of parenting to you?
And by the way, this is a wonderful question because it's coming from a woman who's a wonderful storyteller herself. It is a huge, important part of family life. And I don't mean, because we have two professional storytellers in the audience, I'm not saying, of course, that all parents have to be professional storytellers, but storytelling is one of the most natural human behaviors. When you're giving your kid a bath, you are often telling a story, or your kid's telling you a story. And an understanding of story, I think, is really helpful. My daughter, at one point, when she was very young, I'm doing something in the house, and my son, who was a middle schooler at that point, there's a big hubbub breaks out between my daughter and my son. And I have to intervene. You know, it reached that level. So I'm in there saying, Nick, what's going on? Cassie, what's going on? Why is Cassie crying? Nick, unfortunately, pinning it on him because he's the older kid. He goes, she's crushing a pea in the carpet, knowing that he was going to win the argument there. So he wanted me to get her in trouble. Actually, he was much more compassionate, a wonderful big brother. I found out that in kindergarten that day, they had told the kids the story of the princess and the pea, which you'll remember is a pea underneath all the mattresses, so the true princess can feel that. And so what the teacher had them do was put their hands on top of each other's to simulate the mattresses. So my daughter was simply acting out a story that she had heard and had a pea and crushed it in the carpet. So we had a discussion about peas and carpets and all that kind of stuff. But I had to step back and say, this is story working in her life. What an incredible gift for a lifetime, understanding yourself, etc. So yeah, that's an example of how important story can be and how natural it is. Thank you for that question.
Hi, Tim.
Hi.
This is related to the first question a little bit. I'm a parent educator and work with moms a lot of times. I wonder what you have for dads who wants to be domestically committed, and what was a first step that you can suggest to them?
That's a great...
hardworking, stress out, long hours.
Yeah, exactly. And again, you're being realistic. You know, that we can't just snap our fingers and say all men should suddenly change. There are all kinds of things involved. I think the first step, and to me there are two first steps. One is for a husband to think, and again, we talked earlier about all the different types of families. We're talking about this situation. For a husband to actually think lovingly about his wife, not just feel lovingly about her. So in other words, what would help her in her life? And a big part of that is where a man becomes domestically committed, because many, many women, if not most, are bearing a huge burden at home. So that's part of it, that first step. And the other step is to ask himself, if he's a parent, I mean, the first step is if you're a spouse, what are you? What should you do? The second step is if you're a parent, what are your goals? And again, I'll refer to long-term thinking. If you have children, you have to think long-term. And long-term thinking is going to make you stop in most cases and say, how can I best help this child? And the answer about being committed to the child. Spending more time. I've seen recent Pew research that suggests many, many men, many fathers are worried about not spending enough time with their kids. It worries me that they're not spending enough time, but it makes me happy that they're worried about not spending enough time. And that again is that first step. Look at the long-term goal. Why are you married? Why are you a parent? Then decide the practicals. And if you look at it in that way, I think the practicals tend to fall in line. Thank you.
I'm also a storyteller, and so I was fascinated by chapter 6, where you go into detail about how you and your daughter created the story of the little lost girl and the king improvisationally because of an event that was going on that you were then kind of removed from, the two of you, and how you incorporated her room, her toys, her reality into almost a classic fairy tale kind of structure. And you give it very fully in the book. Did you do this other times? Was there more of this? How did you come to that?
That's a wonderful question, Tom. And I especially appreciate one phrase you used there, which was her reality. So this exchange of story, and again, it doesn't have to be formal. It happens very naturally for people who have no interest in storytelling. Many parents become storytellers when their children are young. It is a way for people to exchange deep perspectives that they might not have in each other, including a father who was a stay-at-home dad with his own daughter who he's with already 3 years, basically 24/7. Her reality doesn't always come through to me because I'm an adult and I've forgotten, and she's her own individual person. In this case, this was not only story, but as often happens with young children, story and dramatic play are just automatically intertwined. So we would play this regularly, that particular one, and we had a lot of others that we would do. She had a great fear of storms. We lived in upstate New York at the time, and for a short period in her life, she had a great fear of storms. And we'd read a picture book, a wonderful picture book, about a storm, and a tree had fallen down in the house, and the cat was outside, and the little girl wanted to go out and get the cat. And we had an entire scenario that we would do at night based on this, where she was the cat and I was maybe it was a little boy or whatever. I can't remember the details. I'm sure she could. And we would go through this whole thing, which was a way of calming her fears, putting them in a context, reassuring her. But even more deeply, I think the stories not only help children deal with these practical issues, like you were talking to me before the show about the Annie stories, they also are an amazing spiritual, psychological tool to help human beings wake up to the full potential of life, to see the beauty in life, to feel peace, to feel the love in the family. So again, those things, you don't have to sit down and analyze what you're telling your kids. If stories are going back and forth between adults and kids, important things will happen in those stories. It just happens. She initiated many of these herself.
Tim, I'm lucky to be a grandmother now. Have
Wonderful.
a
I wish I
husband-
had that luck.
I have a husband who was an excellent father, what you call a committed father, and we are now reaping the benefits of seeing our grandchildren being raised by loving fathers, along with their wives, loving mothers and fathers. And my daughter and son-in-law have this phrase, the primary parent, that calls to, who's on duty now.
Who's on duty now, right?
And so we think the change is already beginning. How can we encourage it?
Oh, that's a great question. First of all, I have to say too, just that what I believe in all the time is stepping back and looking at just the basics here. My wife and I talk constantly about the ripple effect. Because of the nature of human beings, the world is changed one heart at a time. Right now, there are approaching 7 billion hearts on this planet with us. And you could think one heart at a time, how are we ever going to get anything done? Well, the truest, deepest things have to happen one heart at a time. So the ripple effect, I love hearing from you that you can see this cascade in your family. And of course, the satisfaction that you have as parents thinking about your children and their children, God only knows where it stops too. And in fact, it may not stop at all. And we do know that these changes are happening. Obviously, part of it, too, is that we need to get the word out because there are a lot of people who do not understand this, haven't been exposed to it. Many of us in this room have changed, but we also did not have models from our own parents. So modeling is also a huge part of it. That really starts to build up momentum. But I think, too, one of the celebration aspect to me of this is really important. So when we celebrate each other, and I love the fact that Sandy quickly said, of course, loving mothers too. This has to be a two-way street. The celebration of any parent of other parents, or of anybody who's interested in community of people who are parenting well, that becomes really important. As a writer and a storyteller too, I really think about this. How do you dramatize this? And one of the things I try to do in the book was dramatize. It's not easy to dramatize something that means you're down there at the wash machine pulling out the sodden clothes and dumping them in the dryer. But in fact, it's incredibly dramatic. So part of our celebration of those values, I think, is going to make a huge difference. And I think, too, our celebrating and modeling is also very helpful because it's less polarizing. It's not my role to tell people exactly how they should parent because I know, because I'm the expert, but I try to model and celebrate the things I think are important.
Tim, when I listen to you talk about your personal life as a father and cite some examples from your book, which I love.
Thank you.
Clearly, you're celebrating fatherhood. I get that you're also celebrating in your own way manhood and masculinity.
Yes.
And that's a very moving and important place for any man who is a father or not a father to hopefully attain in his lifetime.
Yes.
In my counseling work with men, before we can get to the celebratory places, I get from a lot of men where they feel inadequate, defective, etc. Shame has to get worked through. And there's a lot of, as you know, societal and cultural
Yes.
influences that hold men apart from one another to be able to talk with other men, other fathers. I love that you talked about the need for that good conversation between domestic partners and parents, that ongoing talk. That's great. But can you share any of your thoughts on what else fathers, expectant fathers or older fathers, need to bring into their life for support?
I think that's a fantastic question. And by the way, thank you too for including domestic partners, because this is clearly not about one sexual orientation, one this, one that. This is a huge issue across the board. Alan, I can't emphasize enough how much I appreciate this question, because this is, as a contemporary male, I had to go through this process, and I was very lucky because I didn't have some of the tough pressures and wounds that many men carry. And it's interesting too, again, polarization and antagonism is sometimes necessary in human affairs. That's a sad fact. There's a time when people have to fight. But any time we can, if we try to meet each other, to collaborate, as Susan has emphasized, we're in a better situation. One of the sad parts about the rise of feminism is that it often put men and women into adversarial positions with each other. We all have to make individual judgments about our individual political, social efforts at change when it is time to confront and fight. And I would never say that's never applicable. But one of the things that happens now is there is a tendency for some people to vilify men, particularly if those men are traditional. A traditional man is often a traditional man because he was raised in a traditional world. Not all traditional values are bad or negative. I mentioned this before. There are conservative values like the value of responsibility that I think is incredibly important. Again, not that liberals are irresponsible. So I think the first step, and Alan is a person who's beautifully embodying this in his own life and career, the first step is for men to talk to other men about this. This was not something that was talked about between my father and me, for example. In fact, I was shocked at certain points. At one point in my life, my father told me, I think I must have been 26, 27, had 2 kids. My father said, I need to talk to you. And my first thought was, oh my God, I'm in trouble. My father comes over and he says to me, and I still remember the shock I felt and the relief, because I'm still a kid and he's my dad, right? He said, I've been having some trouble with the younger kids. Can you give me some advice? I was just astonished. This was the first time my dad and I had ever, the fact that we were talking about parenting was an incredible breakthrough. So I think what's really important, and again, your life embodies this, Alan, which I so appreciate. Men who have gone through this need to talk to men who are about to go through this. Men need to talk about these issues in a big way, just like women have traditionally done. I mean, women are of all stripes and persuasions too, but wow, I'm a dad. What does that mean? It's a normal thing to talk about fatherhood. That's a change, and that can only help. And I think that is well underway. I think it's common. I would imagine that in most places it's common for even traditional conservative fathers to talk about fatherhood more than they did before. Maybe not as much as I would like, but I think that's happening.
Thank you very much.
You're so welcome.
Hi, Tim.
Hi.
Yeah, I really like when you mentioned about the future generation in the previous interview. And I have a question because the world is changing. So what do you think is the best kind of scenario? Which one is kind of, you prefer traditional or tell me.
That's a good question because the dream precedes the deed, right? What we set as our goals. This is why goal setting is so incredibly important. And again, the spouses talking together. What a lot of people do is stumble through day to day in routine panic, right? You have to carve out that time to sit back and talk about, as a family, what are our goals? As a husband and wife, as domestic partners, what are our goals? And we have to do that as a nation. We have to do that as a society. So the question is, what kind of scenario, like you said, do we foresee, and can we find, a big practical question is, can we find some consensus on this? And by my read, this is impressionistic, but by my read, surprisingly, there's more consensus on this than one might think, given the polarization of conservative and liberal, because I think a lot of people have some basic desires. They want to be loved, they want to be understood, they want to be accepted, they want to develop themselves as much as they can, and family is one of the single most important theaters where that kind of human development can occur. So my idea is that we continue to work on the social political issues that are feminist. In other words, equal pay, all that kind of thing, that we work on the deeper cultural images and expectations we have. My daughter and my wife and I have been having some very lively discussions about True Detective. I don't know if you're familiar with some of the controversies about this current show, about sexism, about men and women, all the rest of it. And then more importantly, honestly, not hugely more importantly, but more importantly by a nose, is how we treat each other in our intimate relationships, which Susan alluded to during our interview. That idea of basic justice and fairness in families is absolutely critical. And even more important than that, and here we go back to the human condition, love. Love and how we express it. So my modern scenario would be a world that continues to be, and of course this is very, very far from being finished on a global, at a global scale, that we work to bring this true equality out, educational opportunity, economic, all those things that we all want, and at the same time we work on our individual family relationships so that there's this equality and justice that we want. And I'll throw in one other thing too. It's another huge change which we haven't talked about that much, and maybe it's a different book, although my book is shot through with it, is this understanding of what parenting in childhood really means, because that also has been traditionally oversimplified. I grew up in a very oversimplified house in terms of how my wonderful, hardworking parents parented. Like you said, things have changed. So those, change in the socio-political arena, change in the cultural arena, continuing the change, the deeper, even slightly more important change in our own families and how we are fair and loving to each other, and this understanding of what childhood is and what the incredible ramifications of parenting are. That's my scenario for the future. That's what I'm hoping for.
Oh, Sis, that's a lot. Thank you.
That is a lot. Thank you. Oh, and I want to just again thank you all. Not only am I grateful, as I said at the beginning, for the fact that you came and the prominent work that you all do, but holy cow, I didn't know this was going to be fun. I mean, thank you very much for that. It's been fascinating.
Thank you.